Hello, everybody. I'm here with Dr. David Dandridge, holding a 38th professor of biology at Purdue University. David has done videos in the past explaining biology to people, and I wanted to reach out to him and ask him some questions about monkeypox, and he has agreed to talk with me today. And I'm hoping that will help dispel a myth about the virus and provide information that people can use. David, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity, Adam, to share some information about monkeypox and the recent epidemic. So I'm an associate professor of biological sciences at Purdue University. I've been teaching the graduate course on virology here for quite some time. I work on the entry of enveloped viruses into cells. Enveloped viruses that I've worked on include retroviruses, alpha viruses, the Ebola virus. You might consider the monkeypox viruses also envelope viruses. Envelope viruses have a membrane around them, and so they entry through a process of membrane fusion that we've studied. I'll just mention, I also worked with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency Biological Weapons Proliferation Prevention Program. And in that capacity, I've traveled to a formerly secret bioweapons lab in Siberia to try to prevent the spread of not only the biological agents, but the expertise that's necessary to turn them into biological weapons. I currently teach the COVID-19 class at Purdue University, so I have some experience and knowledge about pandemics. If I could just give a little background about monkeypox. Monkeypox is a orthopox. It is in the larger family of that of pox viridae, of pox viruses. It is related to smallpox. It is not related to chickenpox. Chickenpox is produced by a totally different virus of the herpes virus family, varicella zoster. So they are called poxes because they produce pustules on the surface of the skin, and so that's why they're called poxes. But they are there are different types of viruses that cause poxes. One of the first things to know about monkeypox is we don't actually understand its native host. It's called monkeypox because that is the host where it was originally identified was in monkeys, but it's not clear that that's the natural host. People have hypothesized rodents, other mammals potentially as being the natural host of monkeypox, but we don't have the definitive evidence right now. Historically, monkeypoxes have emerged in human populations in Africa. There are two clades. There's the Central African clade and the West African clade. The current monkeypox outbreak, which is present in, for example, Western Europe, the Americas, seems to originate from the West African clade of monkeypox. Monkeypox exemplifies the fact that the emerging infectious diseases, in this case, emerging viruses, are very frequently, if not almost always, recent, and that's in evolutionary terms, imports from other animals. The viruses that cause us the most harm are generally ones to which our immune system is not yet adapted, and there is a mismatch between the immune system and the virus. Monkeypox, like the other orthopoxes, such as smallpox, are DNA viruses. So they are not related at all to viruses such as SARS-CoV-2, which is the cause of COVID-19. It is, those are RNA viruses. DNA viruses have very little in common with RNA viruses. In the case of the pox viruses, it's interesting. They are very, very large viruses. Being DNA viruses, they evolve much more slowly than do RNA viruses. They're much more stable. So not only are they more stable, but immunity to these viruses tends to be more stable as well. And when we're considering immunity, for example, vaccines to monkeypox, it turns out it is closely related, or close enough related to smallpox that smallpox vaccination actually can protect against monkeypox infection. Now, smallpox has been eradicated from the planet. Smallpox is probably responsible for more deaths in the history of humanity than any other virus. And we're talking about clearly at least hundreds of millions of deaths. And it was eradicated through vaccination, through the process of vaccination. But the current younger generation hasn't in fact been vaccinated against smallpox. So that is why we don't have immunity to monkeypox in much of the younger generation, because the virus was, smallpox was eradicated. It was no longer thought that the very, very tiny risks of that were associated with smallpox vaccination, especially in immunocompromised individuals, that vaccinating everyone for smallpox when there was no smallpox around was valuable. So that was suspended decades ago. But we do have that. Interesting things about the pox viruses is because they're so large, one of the things that's encoded within them, one of their capacities, is to evade or manipulate the immune response. And so that's one of the reasons why they tend to be fairly successful viruses. And they don't need to mutate as readily because they have incorporated within themselves immunomodulatory proteins. The final thing I want to just tell you about the pox viruses, the orthopox viruses, is that they have so many things incorporated within them that they almost seem as if they originated as some life form that was not a virus, and they lost some of being a cell. So I would sometimes refer to them as a cell manqué, that they're so much like a cell, they're missing a number of the essential ingredients of a cell, and they obviously can't replicate on their own currently. But there are other types of what we call endosymbionts that live within bacterial cells. There are bacterial cells that would live within bacterial cells that couldn't really survive on their own either. So again, they are not cells, they are not bacterial, they are not addressable through antibiotics that affect bacteria. But by origin, it seems as though they may be, have some sort of independent existence, and that they lost their ability to be independent. And that distinguishes them from other viruses, which may in fact have preceded life. They are not just decayed cells, as pox viruses may be, but they are in fact reflections of what early life may have been. And that's specifically the positive positive strand RNA viruses such as SARS-CoV-2. So happy to address some other questions. Yes.
Human can have the virus because it is very large. It tends to have most of the genes it needs by its own replication.
Yes.
That allow the virus to evade the negative protein from the host cell, that reduce the amount of protein in the base from the host immune system.
So it manipulates. It has things that sort of like look like the immune system, and so it manipulates them and interferes with the activity of for example, the innate immune system, because it encodes these proteins which are sort of like the proteins that are encoded by our actual immune response. It somehow captured those, modified them, and that interferes. So that's that's when it has such a large capacity to hold genetic material. And just make the point that DNA is inherently much more stable than RNA. That's why all of the current cellular-based organisms are based upon DNA, because the genetic material, the process of inheritance, is much more stable with DNA than with RNA. RNA, in the process of the development of life, preceded DNA. DNA was a more recent invention, we could say, and I would argue it was invented by reverse transcription, the process by which retroviruses replicate themselves. But in any case, they just have all these proteins that sort of look like the proteins in the immune response, and that allows them to manipulate it. The other thing which is interesting about pox viruses, for example, is that they also manipulate the cellular processes to, for example, move around the cell. And so they interact with a movement protein that forms filaments in the cells called actin, and it causes the actin to polymerase, so it thrusts the virus out of the cell, and it can be communicated to other cells by that means. So it's very different from most of the other viruses that we think about. These pox viruses are very, very sophisticated, and that's so dealing with them is challenging, but we do have quite a bit of experience with them. And this is one of the other things that I think people need to understand, is that we continue to need to study things like pox viruses. Even though we eradicated smallpox, doesn't mean we can just say, okay, we're done with the pox viruses, we don't need to study them anymore. These sort of challenges of viruses coming from other animals into humans are going to happen continuously. And we need to understand them both when they happen to enter a human host, but also in their natural animal hosts. We need to be prepared for when they are emerging, but also we need to just understand the basic virology in order to be prepared.
Dr. Stanton, let me ask you the question that a lot of people have in their minds. And how can we avoid catching monkeypox? How did monkeypox transmit from one human to another human?
Sure. So again, this is a statistical phenomenon, but most of the time it is through close skin-to-skin contact, or close exterior contact from one person to another. That's what we need to think about. That is, it's just, this is about public health and transmission of viruses, right? That's and any sort of close contact is the way that there's going to be transmission. There is evidence for monkeypox as well as smallpox that it can also be transmitted through a respiratory route. It seems as if, as opposed to something like measles or chickenpox, where there is substantial respiratory transmission and you don't have to be right next to somebody in order to transmit it, the evidence suggests that transmission of monkeypox really requires, through the respiratory route, much closer contact. As I said, the pox viruses are very large viruses and therefore very large particles. And so their diffusion through the air is going to be less than something that's smaller. So there, again, one shouldn't be either panicked about respiratory transmission. On the other hand, you shouldn't dismiss the possibility of it happening when you are in close proximity to an infected individual. But overwhelmingly, it is through actual physical contact with infected skin.
David, apparently he had contract monkeypox in the past where they developed antibody to the virus. And
Yes.
so would that protect them against a B-time infection?
It does, yes. So there's good evidence that there is substantial protection against reinfection by exposure. And again, we, as opposed to, and I think it's worth making these distinctions, again, there is no relationship between monkeypox and SARS-CoV-2. The fact that in time they happen to emerge sort of, overlapping, there's no information there. That doesn't actually tell us anything. But the fact that it is also much more stable as a virus genetically means that there is going to be much less chance of any sort of immune escape during the time between one infection and later exposure. So antibodies generated by infection do protect against reinfection, and they seem to be fairly effective.
And finally, is there anything else that we would like the public to know about the current monkeypox outbreak?
Sure. So, I mean, it's illustrative. I want to just point out the lessons that monkeypox has for us. The first lesson is that this is an issue that people in Central Western Africa have been dealing with for quite some time. And though there are researchers who follow it, I believe that there has been inadequate attention paid to it. Unfortunately, we in the Western world tend to focus on those infectious agents which affect us. And I can understand that. And I'm not saying that the majority of our resources shouldn't be focused on those diseases that affect us directly. And so, for example, we have far more heart disease because of diet, other things here in the Western world. So we tend to focus our research on that. Perfectly valid. Nevertheless, we should not ignore global health issues. It is important, to paraphrase a former president, to fight the viruses over there before we have to fight them over here. And so it's really important to invest resources, both research and healthcare resources around the world in order to try to deal with these emerging diseases. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is that we, again, should not focus on conspiracy theories about origins of these viruses. there are viruses that are going to come from other animals into humans all the time. We encounter them all the time. Most of the time, our immune system is successful in defending us against it. But given the number of people and modern travel and our invasion of wild spaces, we're going to have these spillover events, these transmissions from animals, what are called zoonoses in the trade, where they spill over from animals into humans. This is going to happen with a certain amount of frequency. And we don't have to decide that it was, that it was created by humans as opposed to there being transmission. But in the other message here is that there was one or a very small number of introductions from Africa into the Western population. It is now a Western disease. We cannot say, oh, this is, just due to travel to Africa. That was probably how it was introduced, but that is not. We are talking about a public health issue in the Western world. We can learn from what's happened in Africa, but it has nothing to do with Africa at this point. It's a virus, and this virus is being propagated in Western society. The final message is we should not panic. We understand quite a bit about the virus. We understand about the nature of its transmission. We understand we have some drugs that work against smallpox that also seem to be effective at for monkeypox. I wouldn't refer to them as cures, but they can help suppress the virus. They're in different stages of development. They're not easily obtained antivirals, but there are such things. Vaccination is certainly something that can be used, especially among people who are potentially exposed to it. And I just want to finish up. We should not stigmatize those people who have been infected. This is public health, all right? We're talking about an infectious disease. We should not blame people who acquire an infectious disease. There are things that we should do to protect ourselves, and I encourage everybody to engage in those sorts of protections. But we have to focus on the virus, on public health, on the disease, not on blaming victims of the disease.
Dr. Tan, thank you for the time today. That has been very illuminating, and I appreciate the information you have given us.
Well, thank you very much. Again, thanks for reaching out. I'm always happy to try to share with people how science impacts on society. And I want to just thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Cam. Have a good day.